Well, I realize the title's a little bit hard to read. Sorry about that. It says, "What is God's perspective?" So I had an interesting experience yesterday. I went to my older kids' school, the boys. They go to a school called Journey Academy, and it's an Acton school, private Acton Christian school down in Littleton. And they just finished closing in on their new building. And so they held kind of a celebration evening last night where we went and they shared kind of their plans for renovations and we got a tour of the building, and they had kind of a worship night, so we sang songs together and prayed together for the future of the school and for the, thanking God for everything that he, allowed to be possible through the school. And it was a very, it was beautiful and humbling. So a little bit of background. So this school was started 5 years ago by two families that were homeschooling their kids and decided they wanted to, that they needed something more. They needed a community. They needed a larger atmosphere for their children than what they could provide in their homes. So they got together and they decided to start Journey Academy. And then that was 5 years ago, and now 5 years later they have 120 students. And they just closed on a multi-million-dollar building. And they have no debt on purchasing the building. And they were, part of the gathering yesterday was talk about, well, they want to raise some money to renovate the building to be more ideal for their purposes. And they said, we have a donor who will match any donations up to $400,000. And I'll tell you that after that, or during that, and then of course I happened to have a finance meeting earlier that day, and I tell you I was feeling real small. Like, wow, I mean, like, I know that they must have their fair share of challenges that they're dealing with to grow a school so quickly, and I'm sure there are many things that they're dealing with, and it hasn't been easy. But it just felt like, wow, they've been able to accomplish so much in so short of a period of time. And I found myself wondering, how many years are we going to continue to just pinch pennies and try to find ways to make things happen the way we're doing things, where it seems like we have to struggle to even just do basic things. And they're here, talking about, well, we just, I don't even know how much they need to raise, but it's at least $400,000. Huh? They're trying to raise $800,000. Yeah, so, and they'll do it. I have no doubt, actually. I have no doubts at all that they will do it. I felt that for myself, I feel ready for a perspective shift personally. I feel that Adonia and I, we have certain strengths and skills that we bring to the table. And, I think that we bring a lot of consistency. I think we bring a lot of sincerity. I think we bring a lot of good things. I think we bring a lot of, like, a desire to just do, we don't want to let ourselves be limited by our circumstances. So if we want to do something, we find a way to do it, even if it means that we have to, do it ourselves. But there's a certain, I guess, a scarcity mindset, for maybe lack of a better term, that that it just feels like there's never enough. And I'm really feeling that I want to have a shift in the future. I don't know how it's going to happen. It's not like we can just easily snap our fingers and change that way of thinking. But I really hope that, in the coming years that we can attract maybe some people to our community who have a more of an abundance mindset than we do, and that we can work together to, maybe do things a little bit differently. Because, there's a time and a place for everything, but I hope that we can move to a stage where we can think more of, bigger things. That's my hope. And that was kind of my feeling from all of this that it's not that it's been bad, but not something that we can just keep doing forever either. I want to share a quote from our founder. He said, "Because the relationship between God and man is so fundamental to life, our understanding cannot proceed until we have clarified this question thoroughly. As we pursue the answer, we discover that there are two main perspectives which we might take. One view is from God's standpoint, and the other is from man's point of view. Although various religions have developed through pursuing these two views, there must be one principle common to all religions which can clarify the relationship between God and ourselves. God wants us to understand this truth in its ultimate sense." So what I get from that is that perspective is important. Perspective shapes our life. It defines how we live, the choices that we make, the habits that we have. In many ways, it defines what we choose to invest our time, our energy, our money into for the results that we'd like to see happen in our lives. So the things that are important are like our perspective on God. Who is God? What is God a meaningful part of my life, a part of the decisions that I make? Is God just a being that I acknowledge to exist? Or do I even believe in God at all? What is right and what is wrong? Like, how do you define that? Like, what do I see as things that are right or wrong in my life versus like maybe what other people are doing or what's happening in society? These kind of ways of thinking, our ideas, our perspective is going to define the way we live our life. So what matters at the end of the day, and this is kind of what our true Father was alluding to here, is that there's one point of view, which is God's point of view, and then there's man's point of view. And every person has a different point of view. Every person has a different perspective, or you could call them opinions or whatever. From my point of view, things might look a certain way. I go to this school and I see, oh man, look at all the cool stuff they've been able to do. Maybe their point of view, the school people, is very different. They're like, oh, I wish we could have done more. Or maybe their point of view was that it's so much more than they expected. And that was kind of the perspective I felt from them. Like, they just felt abundantly blessed, like more than they could have anticipated was going to happen. Like, I don't think that they set out 5 years ago to start school and expecting things were going to be the way they are. And then there's God's point of view. Maybe God is seeing them at their place and has a completely different perspective on how things are and how things will be in the future. And I think that that's something important to remember, that our point of view is never going to be the same as God's point of view. Just like how our point of view is often different than even our spouse's point of view or like the people in our lives. We all see the world differently. But we shouldn't rely on our point of view solely. We only see one side of things. We see our view of whatever we're looking at. No matter how old you are, no matter how experienced you are, no matter how wise you are, you're only going to see one side of things. And I think that what really matters is that we seek God's point of view. And that we shouldn't take our own perspective too seriously. We should always seek to try to understand what is God's point of view on the situation. And so for me, like coming away from this meeting and everything yesterday feeling really small, well, maybe there's some truth to that perspective. But is that how God sees what we're doing? Maybe small in the sense that it's the beginning of something much bigger, or could be much more. But small in the sense of insignificant, I don't think God sees it that way. But it's very easy for us to feel as Sometimes we feel so small in this world, right? Sometimes we feel so insignificant, like, what does my life matter? What do my actions matter? So that it's important for us, and I think that the more we seek to find God's point of view, the more these things become apparent to us, the more these things become ingrained into us. Otherwise, we live our life, and it's very easy to just see everything from my small point of view. So there's So I think that the idea that God sees me differently, this is something I was reflecting about, the idea that God sees me differently than I see myself is something that's very humbling, that I think that we need to take that to heart. Now, the way I see myself, the way I see my loved ones, my children, my parents, it's only one perspective, and God sees things very differently. I would say in a way that we need to seek for that understanding if we really want to live a wholesome life. And we have to remind ourselves that, perspective seems like a really simple concept, but it's such an important thing if you think about, we study in the principle about history and the fall, and the beginning of all of that was just simply Lucifer and human beings not being able to see from God's point of view. That was the beginning. That was the beginning. That was the start. That was the formation of it all. And then from there, our actions brought us away from God. But the beginning was just a difference of perspective. We think God doesn't love me. God can't forgive me. I have to hide my shame. There's no hope for me, or my actions don't matter. I think a lot of the same things we think today are not so different than the things that people thought in history. And Jesus talked a lot about parables, and a lot of the things that are recorded in the Bible, things that Jesus said, were just him trying to teach a different perspective to the people of the time. This is another quote from our founder. He said, "Jesus Christ's teachings were hitting the very core of this fundamental truth. The more you give, the more you receive. God rewards total giving with total love, and total sacrifice with total life. Giving creates room for God's love to enter. To be treated well, you must first treat others well. You reap as you sow. Sow evil to reap evil. Sow goodness to reap goodness. Your concern should be how to give and how to give well. As for the return to you, you must trust God with that. He will take care of it." So, some of those things, might be challenging. We hear them a lot, so maybe we don't think about it so deeply. But if I were honest and I was hearing these words, to be treated well, you must first treat others well. Well, that sounds really good in concept, right? But in reality, don't we often think, well, if I treat others well, won't they just take advantage of me? Who's to guarantee that I will be treated well in response? No one can guarantee that for me. What about, maybe many of you have had experiences where you felt taken advantage of or taken for granted when you tried to help somebody. The reality is, it's not always there's no guarantee that if you try to treat others well, that you'll be treated well. There's no guarantee that if you concern yourself with how to give well, that if you trust in God to return it to you, then, I think that these words are true, but if we really ask ourselves, am I confident in these things? That a lot of maybe past experience, concerns, fears, anxieties actually do come up. And we find ourselves actually really wondering, if those things are true, if they will come true. It's only through trying to understand these things and putting them into practice do we actually discover if they're really true or not. Here's a couple other things. Early in my life, God called me for a mission as his instrument. I was called to reveal his truth for him as his prophet. Since then, I have received many astonishing revelations. God himself told me that the most basic and central truth of the universe is that God is the Father and we are his children. We are all created as children of God. And he said there is nothing closer, nothing deeper, and nothing more ultimate than when Father and Son are one. One in love, one in life, and one in ideal. What I am trying to illustrate is the value of an object. As we are the objects of God, he has placed us in a position equal to himself. Thus, man shares the same value as God and is just as important as God. Even though God is most high and noble and mighty, he too must have his object. Otherwise, he feels no joy. Joy comes when you receive stimulation from the object. Not even God can be joyful alone. You must realize that God created man and the universe for joy. But God's joy remains dormant until he can have give and take with his object. Man has been unable to realize that God is so close, so real, so approachable, that we can even dwell with him. So these words are confronting, at least to me. I don't know about you. They're confronting because I have to really ask myself, do I really believe that God is so close, so real, and so approachable that we can even dwell with him? Do I really believe that God is less joyful without me being his object partner? Do I really believe that I, as a human being, share a value equal to God in a sense? I think that if I were to ask myself these questions really honestly, I would really struggle to say yes, to really have confidence that I really believe these things. But this is the value of going back to the root. Because when we're living our life and we're taking in the environment around us, what the world says, what society says, what social media says, or whatever we take in our life from a day-to-day basis, they're not generally reinforcing these ideas. But and so our perspective tends to shift over time, and we don't see ourselves the way God sees us. We don't see the people in our lives through God's eyes, but it's through reading and praying and trying to understand and asking God, what is your perspective? What is your perspective on me? What is your perspective on my children? What is your perspective on this world and all the things that are happening in there? Not saying that we necessarily will always get answers, but I think that if we seek, then we can have the opportunity to discover. If we don't seek, it just becomes based on what I think is true. So we had a heat pump installed in the new parsonage last month. It was kind of a long process, but finished installing it last month. And if you don't know what a heat pump is, it's a really interesting technological advancement in heating. So normally, if you want to heat your house, probably most of you have heat in your house, unless you live down in the South. And most of the time, if you want to have heat, you either need to burn something, wood, natural gas, whatever, and by burning it, it generates heat which flows into your house through vents, or you heat water with that fire, or the other way is just using electricity. You use enough electricity, it generates heat, right? It's very expensive. And so this new technology is a heat pump, and what it does is it doesn't generate any heat at all. What it does is it sucks the heat out of the air, compresses it. I don't know how that works. But that's what it said online. It compresses the heat, whatever that means. And then it sends it into the house, magically, almost. I haven't done enough research to understand how this works, but it works. And it's kind of amazing. You know, we got pretty cold last week. I'm sure everyone noticed. It's like negative, I think the actual temperature Some places got down to like negative 15 or something like that. I think here it was like negative 7 or 8. And then there was, of course, the wind chill, right? But in those circumstances, we don't normally think there's heat in the air. It just feels cold. It feels very cold. And even in that situation, the heat pump is still working, pulling heat out of the air, compressing it, and sending it into the house. Now, one of the problems with heat pumps is they don't work that well in negative temperatures. I guess even with that technology, there's not that much heat in the air. But it's amazing to consider that there's still heat in the air at negative 10 degrees. There's still heat in the air. It's still pulling it out of the air magically and compressing it and shooting it in the house. Yes, at 50 degrees, but still relatively warm. And it got me kind of thinking, perspective. It's like it feels like it's cold, but if I were a cold weather animal, like an Arctic fox or a polar bear or something like that, this would probably feel unbearably hot, right? And from the perspective of, technology, science is teaching us that even at 20 degrees or 10 degrees, there's still heat in the air that can be pulled out and reused. And so the system is very efficient because it's not actually generating any heat. It's just pulling out what's in the air, compressing it, and then reusing it. And similarly, in the summer, it doesn't generate any cold. It just pulls the heat out of the house. It's a cool concept, right? Yeah. So this technology is kind of starting to become more popular in America, but it doesn't work that well in really cold temperatures, and it doesn't work that well if you have an old, drafty house. So there's a couple issues there, which we're dealing with both of those. But hopefully we don't have any more of those super cold days this winter. Seems to happen once a year or so. But for me, it just really illustrates the point about perspective. Like, I can see the world a certain way. And I look at the world and I see our situation, I see what we're doing, I see, the weather in a certain degree where it feels cold, feels hot, whatever. And that is not an untrue perspective. It's a true perspective. But it's not the whole thing. It's not the perspective that maybe other people see who have a different mindset or a different way of thinking. And it's not the perspective that God sees. So the point of the message today, and the reason I read a lot of those quotes, is because we sometimes forget. We think everything is just what I think. Everything is what I see. And it's not. I can confidently say it's not. And we need to take time. We need to take time to step back from what we see life is, or the people in our lives. Sometimes we get so attached to our perspective on people, especially people who are close to us. My kids are a certain way. My spouse is a certain way. They're never going to change. It's, we get that way. You've maybe felt that sometime in your life, or you've been on the receiving end of that sometime in your life, or whatever. Maybe as a child, you felt that your parents were a certain way. But then as you go through different experiences in life, and as you mature and you begin to see things from a different perspective, like maybe that perspective wasn't necessarily completely wrong, but you failed to see some very important things. And a very common thing to happen is when kids get older and they start to see, and they start to have kids, they start to have to work to make money, and they start to really appreciate what their parents did for them. When you try to raise kids well, you find it's really hard. Nobody knows the right way to do it. Nobody feels confident when they're, either starting off or any time along the process. And gives us a greater sense of appreciation for our own parents, and it gives us a greater sense of appreciation for all people who are trying to do the right thing. And frankly, many times we just don't know what we're doing. And I think that reading God's word and asking for God's perspective helps us to develop that sense of ourselves even deeper, even more so, to be able to gain greater sense of compassion for the people in our lives. Because we don't want to pigeonhole the people in our lives. We don't want to make it so that they are a certain way and they can't possibly ever change. Everybody has to have room to have a fresh start. Everybody has to have room to redeem themselves. But sometimes we don't give people that space because we're so convinced that they're never going to change. So we do the same thing to ourselves. We do the same things to, maybe the church. I don't know, just throwing some things out there. It's not like one thing is isolated from another. So I just want to ask this morning, and it's getting a bit too late in the year to keep saying this, but as we start a new year, maybe consider, step back from maybe some long-held beliefs or perspectives that you may have. I know we want to do it. We want to step back from a scarcity mindset way of doing things and look forward to bigger and better things for our community and for our church and for our lives. And so it's not an easy thing to do. It's really not. I think we need God's help, but I do believe that God wants for the same thing for us, for our community, for all people of the world. And that's kind of the gist of my message today. Please join me in prayer. Good morning, Heavenly Parent. We thank you for this day, and we're really humbled, Heavenly Parent, by the never-ending presence that you continue to show into our lives, Heavenly Parent. And you're always guiding us and encouraging us to see things from your point of view, Heavenly Parent. And we sometimes just get really attached to things being our way, or we find ourselves stuck, Heavenly Parent. But we all here because we sincerely want to become closer to you. We want to become better people. We want to understand your perspective for our lives, for our families, for this world, Heavenly Parent, so that we can approach the world with your eyes, with your heart, with your perspective, Heavenly Parent, being like you. And I know that means we got to let go of some stuff, and it's not easy, but we know that you're there guiding us, with us, Heavenly Parent. I hope that something in this message could have touched somebody here, Heavenly Parent. And thank you so much for always being there, supporting us, encouraging us, giving us tough love sometimes. I hope that we can inspire you and give beauty to you in return. And I thank you and offer us prayer in our names as Blessed Central Families. Amen and Aju. Thank you.